Hello.
Yeah.
Yes,
So
sir.
good evening, everyone, and I'll just introduce you, and then you can take over.
Yeah, sure, sir.
Good evening, everyone, and this is Dr. Ashish Kulia, and I work in Tata Memorial Hospital, Mumbai. And thanks to Delhi Musculoskeletal Oncology Group for inviting us to in this teaching program, so that we can contribute to teaching specifically to the Delhi group. And today, to take this case discussion further, I have invited Dr. Rudra Pratap Singh. Dr. Rudra Pratap Singh is an orthopedician by profession, and he is my senior fellow who works with me at Tata Memorial Hospital. And he's going to present a case, and we will stop in between and have some discussions. I had a small discussion just now with Navneet, who was coordinating with me, and I have been given to understand that the audience are a mix of surgery, medical oncology, and radiation oncology residents. So we will sort of discuss things which are pertaining to all the departments. In between, I'll be you can use the chat box for asking your queries, and I think I will request Navneet to keep looking at those queries, and in between I'll stop and I'll ask. Then you can ask the questions, and we can answer in between as well. So I think with that sort of introduction, I would request Dr. Rudra Pratap Singh to initiate the presentation.
Thank you, sir. Good evening, everybody. Greetings from Tata Memorial Hospital. Today, we'll be discussing a case of swelling over distal aspect of the thigh, which we get as a long case in MS, TNB, and MCH examinations. So, directly going ahead with the presentation, a 13-year-old girl which is a student from Uttar Pradesh, presented to us with chief complaints of pain in left knee for 3 months and also swelling in left knee since 2 months. So, to elaborate, the pain in left knee and in lower thigh was present since 6 months. It was insidious in onset, gradually progressive, deep and aching. It was continuous, moderate in intensity. It increased by activity and it was relieved by rest and medication. There was no diurnal variation present with the pain. This point will cover the pain completely. The other symptom that she had was swelling. Swelling was present in the left knee and also extending to the lower thigh, which was present since 2 months. It was gradually increasing in size, and there was no other associated complaints with the pain, except for pain. Apart from these two complaints, she has no significant past personal or family history. She had no history of trauma, no history of fever or weight loss, or any other site of pain or swelling elsewhere. At the end of the history,
so Rudra, let's stop here. Let's stop here.
Yes, sir.
And
Sure,
may I ask any of the residents to just tell me what did they understand by this history? Can somebody volunteer, or I will have to pick and choose someone?
Deepak Sharma.
So Dr. Rudra has given you a history. So what do you understand by this history? What are your salient points? Anyone? No one? Okay. Let me ask Dr. Ashwin Prajapati. Dr. Ashwin, what do you feel? This history is presented with this history of pain and swelling. So, what do you understand by this short history? Where is it taking you?
Sir,
The history, sir, there is a there's not there is no interim decrease in the symptoms, and it is taking towards some neoplastic activity, probably arising from the bone. That's where it taking us.
Okay. So, in short, what we understand is that this is a short, quick history of couple of months. In these couple of months, patient had pain and swelling. Pain has come first, and then swelling has appeared. Pain and swelling has never decreased. They are continuously increased and progressive in nature. And it's a very short history, and which shows that you are dealing with something aggressive. At this stage, we cannot say whether it is neoplastic. It can be infection at times, but it's something which is rapidly progressing, and it is aggressive. Okay. Yeah, Rudra, go ahead.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So the differentials on the end of our history will be neoplastic etiology arising in the distal aspect of the thigh, and in very rare scenario we can say also it can be a chronic infection or inflammation, so inflammatory swelling. So going to the general examination, there was no significant finding or general examination. Patient is moderately built, fairly nourished, well oriented to time, place, and person.
It's okay.
There was no pallor.
Let's skip this.
Yes,
Go
sir,
ahead.
I'll skip this part. Yeah. Directly going to the local examination, the attitude of the limb of this patient was the hip, knee, and ankle were all in neutral position. There was no deformity in any of the joints. On inspection, the swelling there was a single globular swelling about the size of a coconut with indistinct border on left distal thigh. There was no changes in the overlying skin and there was no scar present over it. The swelling had no visible pulsation and there was no distal edema in the limb. The second part of the local examination on palpation.
Okay, so just stop. It's okay. Yeah, complete your palpation and then go ahead.
Yeah, in palpation, I confirmed all my inspection findings. The swelling was warm. It was non-tender. The size was about 25 into 15 centimeter. It extended from knee up to the mid-thigh. Surface was smooth, borders were indistinct, and consistency it was hard. Swelling was not compressible and fixed to the underlying bone. The skin over the swelling was pinchable, and there were no palpable inguinal lymph nodes in the limb.
Okay.
Yes, sir. The hip and knee range of motion were normal, and there was no distal edema or neurovascular deficit in the limb, sir. This completes the examination part, sir.
Okay. Okay. So can you just tell me the positive findings from your examination, and where is it taking you? What do you conclude by this?
So the swelling is a huge swelling on the distal aspect of the thigh, sir. The positive findings are it's arising from deeper aspect, probably from the bone. It is immobile. The consistency hard, but it is non-tender at the same time. And apart from that, sir, there is no other positive finding here, sir.
Okay. So what we understand is that this swelling, the size of the swelling, which you say is the coconut size swelling, right? And then you have measured it as well.
Yes, sir.
So what we are looking at that in a very short duration of time, there appears a very huge swelling. Okay. Now the pain came first and the swelling came later. That means if the swelling is deep seated, it is involving structures which are pretty pain sensitive. On examination, you had findings that the swelling was globular in nature with indistinct margins. That means it is arising from the bone. It is not mobile, fixed to the underlying structure. That means it is arising from the bone. Soft tissue swelling would be a bit superficial and mobile and won't stuck like this. Okay, so that's how you need to explain in the examination that how you are arising to the site or the location of the pathology which is there, and how you are determining that whether it is neoplastic whether it is infectious or something else. If it is neoplastic, then you have to have specific positive findings to ensure, which tells you whether it is a benign or low grade neoplastic process going on, or it's a malignant or it's a high grade neoplastic pathology. So these are the findings which you have to clearly mention in your examination, and then you take it ahead. So would you like to re-summarize your positive findings now?
Yes, sir. So it's a rapidly growing swelling on the distal aspect of the thigh, most probably either arising from the bone or fixed to the bone with hard consistency, indistinct borders, and no neurological deficit in the limb present, sir.
Okay. So at this stage, what pathologies you can expect in a distal femur which appears like this?
So we probably are dealing with a neoplastic, probably a malignant etiology, sir, arising from the distal aspect of the thigh. It can be either arising from a soft tissue or a bone, sir. The probable chances of it having a bony sarcoma is higher as compared to a soft tissue swelling invading the bone. So my more
Is it
probable
an
diagnosis
eccentric
would be a
swelling
bony
or
sarcoma.
a globular swelling?
It is a globular swelling, sir. It's not an eccentric one.
So it's more
The bone itself.
Yeah. So why you are saying you have completed the examination? At the end of the examination,
Yes.
you should be pretty clear in stating your findings and what are the conclusions of your findings. If you would have said the same thing at the end of your history, I would have accepted it. But now you have examined the patient in detail. Now you have to corroborate your examination finding to ensure and tell whether it is a bony sarcoma or it is a soft tissue sarcoma. Okay.
Yes.
So in addition to it,
So
what other differentials can be there except for neoplasm?
On the after examination, sir, the only probable diagnosis can be a neoplasm. It's very unlikely that it can be a chronic inflammatory swelling or an infection.
So what are the negative findings, or what is the negative history you have elicited to say that it is not infection? Because infection is the most probable differentials which appear in this scenario.
There was no history of fever to this patient, sir. There was no decrease in the symptoms in between, sir.
No regression of the swelling in between with any treatment.
In between,
okay.
Sir.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. On inspectory finding, there were no local signs of inflammation or no history of a discharge or a sinus at the local site, sir.
Okay. Good. Anything else?
That's it, sir.
So when some examiner asks you such negative history or positive history, the best way to answer is that you start from the beginning. You started from the history, okay? To tell about the history, that it is there are no remissions in the history. It's continuously progressing. In history, there are no signs which suggest of inflammation or infection, which include any draining sinuses, fever, inflammation, etc. There is no history of trauma, because trauma can lead to subacute or chronic infections in the bone. So there is no history of trauma. So this comes in history. And in examination, as you rightly said, that there are no local signs of infection or inflammation, right? Like increase in the temperature or redness of the skin or any scars or sinuses. In addition, you should also mention that there are no palpable lymph nodes as well. So most probably, if this would have been a long-standing infection or acute or subacute infection, then this patient would have enlarged draining lymph nodes because of infection. It can happen in bony sarcoma, but that is extremely rare. But that's again an important negative finding. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So now with the given history and given examination, we understand that we are dealing with a neoplastic pathology. Most probably it is arising from the bone, the distal end of the femur. What's patient's age?
Patient 15 years, sir.
15 years. So let's suppose I say that it is fine. It is looking like a bony pathology or neoplastic procedure. So what are the differences in your mind with these history and examination?
It can be either an osteosarcoma, sir, and secondly, it can be a Ewing sarcoma of the distal femur, sir.
Why not aneurysmal bone cyst?
Since the swelling is rapidly increasing in size, sir, and it's having a short history, so we are looking at a malignant pathology rather than a benign one. So I would rather go for a sarcoma instead of a ABC, sir.
So ABC cannot happen at all.
It can happen in the distal femur, sir, but the history is not suggestive of a benign pathology, sir. The rate of growth is higher, sir.
ABC can also expand the bone. It can also grow rapidly.
Okay. Yes, sir. But the chances of it being a sarcoma are higher as compared to a benign swelling, sir.
Yes. So be true to your findings. Yes. So rarely, locally aggressive benign tumors can behave like this. Why not GCT?
Yes.
Why not GCT?
The age group is not suggestive of giant cell tumor of bone, sir.
So she's slightly immature patient. It is not a common age for having giant cell tumors. ABC can happen. But again, the rapid progression of the swelling and the associated pain, it is unlikely to be ABC, but yes, it can be one of the last differences. So why did you say osteosarcoma before Ewing sarcoma?
Because of
Harsha.
the age group, sir.
Dr. Harsha, please.
Hello, sir. So from the examination points, it is
You resemble
mostly
me a
like
lot, Harsha.
Sir.
You resemble me a lot.
Sir, sorry, sir, I couldn't change that.
That's okay.
Yeah.
That's okay. That's okay.
Yeah. So from the examination, it is clear that it is arising from the metadiaphyseal region of the thigh. So, and given to the age at around in the late second decade, so the most common thing, neoplasm, first it will be an osteosarcoma, but it's not that Ewing's could not happen. Ewing's also could be happen, but we have to, then we'll go for histopathology and then we'll confirm the diagnosis.
Okay. So let me ask Dr. Akash Singh. Dr. Akash Singh, are you around? Sleeping. Dr. Deepak Sharma. Dr. Deepak Sharma, why if the age would have been, let's say, 8 years, what would have been the first differential? I think everybody is absolutely silent and quiet. So it's a one-way traffic. Anyone else? Anybody taking that question? No? Okay. It seems like one-way traffic. Okay. So we'll continue that.
Sir, in first decade of life, Ewing sarcoma is more common, but
Okay.
axial
Sir,
skeleton.
You are from surgical oncology, medical oncology, radiation oncology.
Surgical oncology, sir.
Okay.
And but axial skeleton is the more common site than the appendicular skeleton. But if you ask in first decade of life, that is at 8 years, Ewing's will be more common than osteo.
Okay. Good. Fine. I just wanted to ask somebody because I don't want people to just switch on their WhatsApp and go to sleep. That's the reason. So I'm again requesting the people who are not interested, they can actually leave the class. I don't mind. But if you want to attend the class, you have to be participating in the class. So, Dr. Tejas, what if this lesion would have been located in the diaphysis of the femur? Then what you would have said? Same age, 16 years, lesion in the diaphysis. Yeah, but
So the age group is not common. So Ewing sarcoma would be my first preference.
okay. So that means Ewing sarcoma cannot happen in metaphysis. It always happens in diaphysis.
More common in diaphysis. And
It never happens in metaphysis. Does it never happen in metaphysis?
rare, but it happens in the junction of.
Yeah, so that's what I wanted to give a message, that please don't think that osteosarcomas never happen in diaphysis and Ewing sarcomas never happen in metaphysis. They can happen, but whatever sites have been given, these are the most probable sites. Okay, so we see lots of divisial osteosarcomas in Tata Memorial, and we see lots of metaphyseal Ewing sarcomas. So that's not a thing to be missed. Okay, fine. So let me ask Dr. Avinash Rajra. Dr. Avinash, now with this given history, with our probable diagnosis of a malignant lesion in the distal femur, how would you like to proceed from here? This patient is there in front of you in your clinic. You have done the examination. This is the history. Now, what next?
Sir, I would first like to investigate the patient.
Okay.
First, I would like to confirm the diagnosis. Then I would like to stage the disease, and then I would like to investigate the patient for taking the patient up for surgery.
Very good.
For
Very good. Very
confirming
good.
the diagnosis.
So can you explain what all you will do under these stages?
Sir, for confirmation of diagnosis, I would like to go for the MRI of the local part. I would like to order the MRI of the
Very good.
of the left femur, including the knee joint, and I would like to image the whole bone. Whole bone
Why
plus
not
the
CT scan?
Sir.
Let's say patient is poor, and he cannot afford 9,000 or 10,000 rupees MRI. So can you manage with CT scan?
No, sir. That would be the suboptimal investigation. I would
Why
still
so?
like to go for MRI of. Sir,
why it is suboptimal?
First of sir, because MRI it gives superior information about the skip metastasis
So
in the marrow.
What are those superior advantages or superior information?
First, sir, it gives about the advantage of the involvement of marrow plus the presence of any skip metastasis in the marrow, which would help me to decide the my surgical margins. Plus, it helps to soft tissue delineation is better in MRI as compared to CT. Plus, I will also like to go see the neurovascular involvement. So these things they prompt me to go for MRI rather than CT.
Okay, Dr. Harshad, he's told few things. Can you quickly summarize it up? Why not CT scan and why MRI as the investigation of choice for local evaluation of a bone sarcoma?
The MRI gives very superior clarification on the extent of disease in the marrow and the extent of disease in the soft tissue, and the relation with the various neurovascular structures in and around when compared to CT, sir. That's why we always opt for an MRI to evaluate the bone lesion initially, bone sarcomas.
Okay. Dr. Tanya, can you tell me what just now I spoke to whom? Anyways, so whomsoever I was speaking to, what did he miss? What do you want to do before MRI? Dr. Tanya S.
Before MRI, can consider an X-ray orthogonal views.
Not consider, you must.
We have to do an X-ray, then MRI.
Yes, exactly. Very good. So this patient is in your clinic and you have to give a prescription for X-ray. What you will write on the prescription form? Let's say this lesion is in the left distal femur.
Okay. X-ray of the left femur and knee joint, AP and lateral views.
Okay. You want to scan the full femur or just the lower part of the femur?
Sir, ideally the principle is the whole femur and the joint above and below.
Why so?
Sir,
What is the reason? What is the rationale behind it? Why do you want to give more radiation to your patient exposed to the X-rays unnecessarily?
So the reason to include the whole bone is to look for skip metastasis, and to include the nearest joint is to see the involvement of the joint space. That's all
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough. Fine. So we did X-ray and we did MRI. So what next, Dr. Raghavendra? What next? We have done the X-ray and we have done the MRI. What next? Is Raghavendra around?
Yes, sir. Sir, bone biopsy.
Bone
Hello, sir.
biopsy. Okay, correctly. Don't want to do anything before that. Dr. Carlton.
Metastatic workup.
Joshua
CT
Carlton,
test,
what are you going to do?
Non-contrast CT test, plain CT test.
Anything before that? Don't you want to do a simple BT-CT for this patient before doing a biopsy? What if this patient has some abnormal bleeding clotting time? What if it's something else? Don't you want to do basic investigations like alkaline phosphatase? Dr. Carlton? Yes, no, maybe.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, you should do it. You should do it. Biopsy is not a very simple procedure. Biopsy actually is a difficult procedure. It's a very important procedure, and you don't want to make mistakes here. Okay. The routine blood investigations are extremely important. Alkaline phosphatase, LDH, they have limited prognostic relevance, but these should be done. And once you have these investigations done, you should plan for biopsy. Okay. So, Dr. Ashwin Prajapati. Dr. Prajapati, anyway, I think let's first go to the
Yes, sir. Hearing.
Do you have the PowerPoint? Can we see the PowerPoint? Can I see the X-ray, please?
Sir. Hello. Is the X-ray visible, sir?
Yes. Dr. Prajapati, can you please explain the salient findings on this X-ray in a systematic manner so that everybody is benefited?
So this is an X-ray of left knee with femur in both AP and lateral view in a skeletally immature patient of a skeletally immature patient, showing osteoblastic and osteolytic lesion in the metadiaphysis with periosteal reaction, with soft tissue component, with ossification of the extraosseous soft tissue component, and there is a wide zone of transition, and there is no obvious involvement of the joint, and there is no other visible skip lesion seen in the on the visible femur.
Great, nice. Do you see a Codman triangle here?
Yeah, so there is a Codman triangle on the lateral anteriorly.
Okay. Thanks, Rudra. Nice description. So here you can see very well explained by Dr. Ashwin Prajapati. You have a lesion which extends in the metadiaphyseal region in the femur. It goes right up to the physis. You have a huge soft tissue component which is visible both on AP and lateral X-rays. It is extending anteriorly, posteriorly, medially. So it's a global swelling. So your exam finding was correct. There's ossification in the soft tissues happening. You have a mixed osteolytic and plastic lesion. You have a Codman triangle, wide zone of transition. That means you cannot demarcate normal bone from abnormal at a pinpoint, and which denotes the aggressiveness of this lesion. So to put it together, we are looking at aggressive lesion in this. So Ashwin, now looking at the X-ray, let me ask Rudra now, not Ashwin. Looking at the X-ray, Rudra, what do you feel should be your diagnosis?
Since there's not much of a soft tissue component associated with tumor, sir, and there is more of an ossification, I would think that it can be an osteosarcoma of the distal femur, sir.
Okay, because it's ossifying lesion, this probably is osteosarcoma of the distal femur. Okay, so I think we will just stop here. Let everybody absorb this X-ray. And are there any questions, Navneet?
Hello. Yes, sir. There are some questions in the
Yeah,
chat
please
box.
go ahead. Yeah.
So one question is how to clinically say which region is the mass arising from? Is it arising from metaphysis or diaphysis? Can it be said clinically? And how to differentiate between trauma and malignancies?
Okay, so we'll go one by one. How to differentiate between metaphysis and diaphysis? Many times in large tumors which we see in India, there's always an overlap. But what you need to see is where is the epicenter of the lesion, or where the swelling is maximum. So like for example, in this case, the maximum swelling was in metaphyseal region, so though it is extending to the diaphysis. So that's how you will differentiate. What was the second question? Whether it is arising from soft tissue or bone?
Trauma versus malignancies.
Yeah. And what is how to differentiate between trauma and malignancy?
Okay. So when a patient has trauma, obviously there will be a specific history of the trauma. With trauma, usually over a period of time, it settles down. Your symptoms will go down. Your with whatever anti-inflammatory treatment or antibiotic treatment, the symptoms will go down. This is a very, very important finding in the history, which I always take all my fellows to take, whether swelling has gone down or the symptoms have gone down in between or not. A neoplastic pathology will never go down. It will always increase unless and until, it's a sarcoma and you have given chemotherapeutic agents where the symptoms will go down. Without any treatment, if a swelling is progressively increasing consistently, rapidly over a period of time, definitely you are dealing with a neoplastic pathology. Trauma, whatever, whether the bone contusions or it was just a soft tissue trauma, it will settle down. It will not stay for 2 months or 3 months. Trauma can also lead to infection in the bones, but those infections will not remain silent. The patient will be very, very toxic. They may actually, if the infection is there in the bone for 2 months, 3 months, they may have septicemia. So the presentation will be completely different. There will be signs of inflammation and infection definitely there. So you will be able to clearly demarcate between the two. So that's how you differentiate between trauma and the neoplastic also. Next.
So every patient should they be given a trial of anti-inflammatory or antibiotics
Do you have
before
a history
starting
of trauma?
chemotherapy?
No, before starting chemotherapy means, do you start a chemotherapy without a histopathological diagnosis? Do you start chemotherapy without doing any imaging? Do you start chemotherapy on history? I think somebody who has asked this question has completely lost the track. How can you start chemotherapy on history? Go ahead. Next.
Yes, sir. Now I think there are no more questions. We can proceed.
Okay. Yeah, Rudra, next. So we know that the
MRI
next
image.
yeah, MRI. So show them MRI pictures. Okay, let's go back to the X-ray again. Yeah, now shuffle between X-ray and MRI. Guys, please see X-ray carefully and see MRI carefully. Okay. In X-rays, where Dr. Rudra has pointed out wide zone of transition, it seems that the lesion is stopping there. Okay. But if you see MRI, can anybody tell the extent of the lesion? Let's pick up somebody from the participant list. Dr. Syed. Dr. Arham Syed, can you please tell me what is the extent of the disease in MRI? We are waiting.
Propaganda.
Sorry? He's not there. Dr. Arun Kumar?
Hello. Sir, the extent, yeah, there is a marrow extent till the few centimeters below the greater trochanter.
Very good. So you saw the difference between the findings in the X-ray and MRI?
Yes, sir. In
Yeah,
X-ray,
so that's what exactly I was talking about. The CT scan or X-rays do not depict the exact extent of the disease. Okay, and it is the T1 weighted MRI which is taken to evaluate the extent of the disease. Okay, that's why MRI is the investigation of choice. You see how nicely in the transfer section you have the relationship of tumor and neurovascular bundle seen. So Rudra, can you show them where are the vessels and where is the nerve?
Yeah, sure, sir. So the vessels are here, sir.
Yeah.
And the nerve is dividing and going on the lateral side here. The rectus femoris is here, and the vastus is stretched over here, sir. This is the bone, and there is a associated soft tissue component around the bone of the tuber, sir.
Okay. So in the lower image, Rudra, I am seeing some white structures.
Yes, sir.
In the tumor, in the lower one, in the lower image, you have sort of this whitish material. So what is that?
Actually, the MRI is a post chemo MRI. So it suggests changes after MRI. They are most probably the necrosis that has been induced by the chemotherapy that the patient has reduced. So these are the small cystic component resultant of the treatment, sir.
Okay. They can be before the treatment as well. Okay. And that's why you need to plan your biopsy extremely carefully. Okay. So, Dr. Ashwin, can you tell me why MRI should be done before the biopsy? Why not do the biopsy straight away? Like somebody had said that we'll do biopsy. So why not do the biopsy straight away? We can palpate the lesion. We can see the lesion on X-ray.
So why
Yes,
MRI
sir.
should be done? Why MRI should be done before doing the biopsy?
Sir, the first thing to put an incision for a biopsy, we need to know that from where we should be doing the biopsy. And for that, we need to know what most probable our final plan will be. So for that, the MRI is very essential. The first thing. Second thing, to target the viable tissue. So that by any chance we don't target the necrotic or cystic component. That is very important. And if we do these are the two most important things. That why we should be doing biopsy after MRI. And the other cause that other things that if we do the biopsy and then do the MRI, then there may be some artifact like edema, hemorrhage, or something. So these are the main reasons why we should be doing biopsy after the MRI.
Good. Good. In addition to that, you need to plan your final surgery before doing the biopsy. Let's, for example, in this case, if I'm planning to do a total femur replacement, my incision is going to be on the lateral side. While if I would have seen only X-ray, I would have done biopsy from the medial side because my medial side has a large soft tissue mass. But then doing a total femur replacement from medial side is a big pain. Okay, so biopsy is not a simple procedure. Before biopsy, a surgeon actually will plan the final surgical procedure which will be required. So it has to be planned very, very carefully. You need to complete all your imaging, local imaging at least, if not the staging investigations. But you must complete your local imaging, assess the lesion carefully, make the track or the path through which you will go, which areas you will target, where you will place your biopsy scar so that the scar can be excised during the final surgical plan. So all those things need to be discussed, and hence biopsy should not be left to the junior most person in the unit. It should be planned carefully, and if there are any doubts, it should be discussed in detail. Okay, so we'll go ahead. What next from now, Dr. Rudra? MRI is done, X-ray is done, investigations are fine. Yeah. Okay.
Yes, sir. So we'll go ahead with the biopsy, sir. So we did a biopsy for this patient from the lateral aspect.
Let me ask this question to Dr. Kaushal. He has just put up a question. And
Sir.
So Dr. Kaushal, can we do a core needle biopsy for this patient as soft tissue component 2? Okay. So let me ask you only. If
Sir.
not core needle biopsy, what biopsy you want to do?
Sir, open incisional biopsy.
Okay. So where do you prefer open incisional biopsy and where do you prefer core needle biopsy?
Sir, tumors with more cystic component, the core needle biopsy will not give a better yield. In those patients, better to do open incisional biopsy. Patient with extensive soft tissue component, which is easily feasible to do a guided core needle biopsy, the preferred will be to do a core needle biopsy in those patients.
Can you quote any evidence for the statement you made?
No, sir, I am not aware of any evidence.
Or this is your own personal experience and thought? Or you have been taught this way?
I have heard in some classes before this, but I have I don't know of any evidence.
Okay. Any other taker? Anybody else? What are the indications for needle biopsy? What are the indications for? Yes, Dr. Bhaskar.
Sir, incisional biopsy should only be done when we are finding when we have done core needle biopsy and we are not getting the result. Means we are suspecting the tumor.
You are speaking exactly opposite to Kaushal.
Yeah, sir. But the thing it should not be done preferably. If you are waiting to done incisional biopsy, should be after if you are getting negative reports on core biopsies, then we can plan.
Why are you in so much favor of needle biopsy? Substantiate your answer.
Oh, okay, sir. So needle biopsy, sir, actually, it is I think is an easy procedure. And even though in core biopsy also, if we are not taking the core biopsy from the bone, it can be done a local anesthesia also. If you are taking the core biopsy from the bone, then obviously it will need some anesthesia. But for for taking the biopsy from the soft tissue components, I think it can be done by local. So incisional biopsy may require the anesthesia part. It will be blended procedure, and that's also.
That's it. Dr. Ashwin Pandit, not Prajapati, Dr. Ashwin Pandit.
Sir.
Please tell me which biopsy do you prefer and why?
Sir, as there is soft tissue component present, I would prefer a core needle biopsy, sir. And open biopsy.
What if there is no soft tissue component and the lesion is only in the
then
bone?
I would prefer a coaxial needle biopsy from the bone, sir.
Coaxial needle biopsy or core needle biopsy, to me, it seems to be the same, right? Or is it different?
It is the same.
You're trying to say the soft tissue gun biopsy.
Yeah. Yes,
True
sir.
cut biopsy.
Yeah, for soft tissue, a true cut biopsy, and if there is no soft tissue component, then
needle biopsy.
Yes, sir. Coaxial needle.
Okay. So, what are the advantages of needle biopsy?
Advantages, it can be done as an outpatient procedure, and the track of the needle can be. I mean, there is minimal contamination of the tissues and lesser chance of hematoma.
Very good. Simple procedure, short procedure, no hospitalization, local anesthesia, less rate of infections, can be done in OPD, less hematoma, less contamination, scar can be easily excised during the final surgery. You can take cores from different areas of the lesion, cost effective. Okay, so these are the advantages of needle biopsy. Usually we do not do open biopsy at all unless and until we have multiple times failed on the needle biopsy, or the diagnosis which we got on the needle biopsy is not matching with the clinical radiological diagnosis. Okay, so these are the two things. The accuracy rate of a well-planned core needle biopsy is in the range of 95 to 96%. You can use various imaging techniques like CT scan, ultrasound, or image intensifier guidance to target specific areas with the needle biopsy to increase your efficacy. If you read your imaging carefully before planning biopsy, your yield will increase a lot. Okay, so these are the points which you need to discuss in your if you're asked questions about biopsy. Okay, Dr. Meenakshi Roy, let's for example we did biopsy of this lesion, and the doctor, the pathologist says that this is chondrosarcoma. What will you do? Meenakshi Roy. Are these people avoiding the class? They are not there. What is the issue? If you don't know, at least have courtesy to say, I don't know. I think she's not there. Great. We will remove the people who are not there. Yeah, Dr. Noor Muhammad, what do you do?
Sir,
what do you do in such a situation?
Sir, if it comes as chondrosarcoma, I would like to take a second review the slide, sir.
You want to take a second opinion?
Yes, sir.
Okay,
Because
so how do you take second opinion? Like, for example, if you're feeling it's a difficult biopsy, you have taken 8 cores of biopsy. So what do? You send all 8 cores to one person, or you divide the biopsy and send 4 to one pathologist and 4 to other pathologists? How do you do?
no, sir, I would request another pathologist to report on the most probable, the best slide. which contains the most relevant
No,
histology.
you are repeating the biopsy. The first biopsy you were not happy. Now you are repeating the biopsy. In the repeat biopsy, you know that you will have to take opinion from 2 different pathologists.
Yes,
Okay, and you have taken 8 course. So what do? You want to send 4 to one pathologist, 4 to other, or how do you want to proceed?
Sir, I would like to yes, sir. I would like to divide it among 2 pathologists,
Okay.
and if required, I would always also ask for any IHC markers, if any, sir.
That's a different thing altogether. Dr. Rudra, how will you proceed?
First of all, sir, the sarcomas are heterogeneous in nature. Multiple cores taken from different area may represent different histopathologies there, sir, different kind of tissues. So dividing the slides into between 2 pathologies will cause a different report between the 2, sir, and that will create a dilemma whether to go ahead with one or the other one, sir. I would rather go ahead with a multidisciplinary team meeting, sir, in which the clinical, radiological, and histopathological finding will be correlated better, and it will help for us to better to arrive at a particular diagnosis, sir.
Send full biopsy material to one pathology team, let them prepare it properly, and if you want a second opinion, then transfer all the blocks and slide to the other. Don't divide the material. Okay, fine. Go ahead. Next, Rudra.
So yes, sir. So we did a true-cut core biopsy for this patient from the lateral aspect, sir, and it came out to be a conventional high-grade osteosarcoma.
High-grade osteosarcoma.
Yes,
oh, great, awesome. So your diagnosis was correct. Fine. Okay. So let me ask Dr. Vineet Kamera. So now this is high-grade osteosarcoma, distal femur, and you have seen the extent of the disease. How will you treat this patient?
Sir, since it is an osteosarcoma, I would plan neoadjuvant chemo, sir, starting initially.
Okay.
So I'd like to do metastatic workup, sir. I would like to do CT chest.
Okay.
And
you want to start chemo first, or you want to do metastatic workup first?
I would like to do first metastatic workup, sir, and then start chemo, sir.
What will be metastatic workup for high-grade osteosarcoma?
CT chest, sir. Breath hold plain CT.
Breath hold plain CT. Okay.
Non-contrast CT, yes.
So what is non-breath hold?
Like.
And why non-contrast? Why not with contrast?
Like with breath holding, the air will act as contrast and help in identifying the lung lesion, sir. Since we want to see the parenchyma, the contrast is not required. Okay. If you want to see any mediastinal structure, then contrast is required. Here it is not required.
Okay. What slice thickness? 10 mm, 8 mm, 5 mm, 3 mm, 1 mm.
5 mm, sir.
Okay. Sure. Usually we take about 3 mm.
3 mm, okay.
Okay. It is done then.
So then, I want to go ahead with chemotherapy, sir, neoadjuvant chemotherapy.
Okay. What neoadjuvant chemotherapy?
There are 2 regimens, sir, MAP regimen and IAP regimen.
Okay, I'll stop you here. Tanya, I'm calling you back again. Did he miss anything? You are good in picking up things. Did he miss something?
Ultrasound, abdomen, pelvis.
For osteosarcoma? Which guideline?
No, sir. No.
Then?
CT chest.
Bone scan, sir.
Bone scan, yeah.
Absolutely.
Bone scan.
Very good. Very good. So you have scanned the lungs, but you need to also look at the other bones, whether whether they have these lesions or not, and then hence you will do a bone scan as well. Fine?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Or we can do PET CT.
Okay, fine. Fair enough. So why didn't you say PET CT? Why you said CT scan of the chest and bone scan? Why not directly PET CT? What is the rationale? And which one you prefer? Don't worry, this is not examination. This class I am taking to teach you. This is the best place to share your thoughts, to ask your questions, and to be wrong. Okay? Please, and that's why I say that it cannot be one-way traffic. It is not for me. I know all this. It's for you guys.
So, bone scan is more sensitive than PET CT to detect bone lesions.
Are you sure? Quote me a paper.
So no, sir, I'm not sure. I'm talking about bone metastasis in case of breast or prostate, where bone scan can pick up earlier lesion if there are lytic lesions. I'm not sure of osteosarcoma. No, sir.
So they also have osteoblastic mets, right? The fluoride F18 PET scan is also equally good, or maybe better than bone scan as well.
Sir, I don't know if one can be preferred over the other. If PET CT is available, then
If a patient,
yes, if PET
you're from which
CT.
hospital?
Sir, I'm doing DNB in HCG in Bangalore.
Okay. So what's your preference? If a patient is coming to you, what you gonna do? You gonna do a PET scan, or you gonna do bone scan?
I would prefer a PET CT because it can be used for response assessment also. If it's not available, then that will be substituted with plain CT chest and bone scan.
Okay. Let's, for example, you are using it for response assessment. Have you ever changed chemotherapy for an osteosarcoma patient who has not responded properly?
Sir, I'm sorry, sir. I don't have much experience in that. This is just like theoretically.
No problem. No. Absolutely, absolutely fine. So, anybody else? Anybody wants to take this question, or else I will say. Anybody wants to ask this question? Sorry, answer this question.
If the necrosis it is on NSCT necrosis is less than 90%.
Can you be a bit loud, please? I can't hear you.
Sir, if necrosis is less than 90%, the few institutes they switch on from MAP to MAP-I, which includes mite and all these.
No, I was not asking that. I was asking. I was still on PET scan and bone scan. Okay. To save time, I will only answer this, and the reason is that I do not think so. There is any difference between doing a bone scan and a CT chest versus a FTG PET scan and a breath hold CT. Advantage of PET scan and breath hold CT is it's a single investigation. So at the same time, you can finish the staging. But a bone scan and a CT scan are two different investigations where patient will have to go to different departments and do it differently. The only reason is that doing a FDG PET scan does not add any additional value, but the cost is higher. So if there are institutes where your PET scan costs equivalent to a bone scan and a CT, a non-contrast CT chest with 3 mm slicing, you are equally justified in doing PET scan. But to say that PET scan add an additional value to bone scan and CT chest, as of now, today, 20th of August, we do not have any evidence to prove or disprove that. And there was a second question about changing the therapy. Again, there is no evidence globally till date that changing therapy improves the outcome. So it is your own choice. If you want to just do it to make yourself happy or to make patient happy, that's okay, but it doesn't improve survival anyhow. So there's a lot of evidence for it. Okay, so that's what about the staging. Now we move ahead. From staging, we'll go to the treatment part. So neoadjuvant chemotherapy, fine. So neoadjuvant chemotherapy, can any medical oncology colleague speak about what regimes are available for high-grade osteosarcoma? Maybe Tanya only can speak. Tanya, I gather that you are a medical oncologist, right?
No, sir, radiation oncology.
Oh, okay. Anyone from medical oncology? Anyone? No? No volunteers? Okay. Dr. Ankita Pandey, what's your experience?
No, sir, I don't know. I'm JR3, sir, radiation oncology.
Okay. No
Sir, I
problem.
don't know.
No problem. No problem.
But there are two regimens, sir. MAP
Okay.
and IAP.
Vinny, yeah, good, good.
I'm surgical oncology resident, sir.
Very good, very good. So just tell them what is MAP and what is IAP.
MAP stands for methotrexate, adriamycin, and cisplatin. IAP stands for ifosfamide, adriamycin, and cisplatin. So
essentially, we talk about methotrexate-based and non-methotrexate-based regimes.
Okay.
And methotrexate-based regime will have adriamycin and cisplatin, and the other side will have ifosfamide. So these are the two basic regimes which are given in osteosarcoma. Okay, go ahead. Which one you choose and why?
Methotrexate, we give high dose methotrexate. The dose is 12 grams per 12 grams. But the problem with methotrexate is monitoring of methotrexate levels is required. So in facilities, in centers where serum methotrexate monitoring is not there, IAP is preferred. Otherwise, if facilities are there and there are no cost containts, then MAP can be given, sir.
You are giving MAP. You are talking about MAP, right?
Yes, sir.
IAP can be given.
If monitoring of serum methotrexate levels and if there are no cost constraints, then MAP is preferred, sir.
Yeah, I'll just summarize it. Essentially, globally, especially in pediatric age group, people prefer methotrexate-based regimes. Okay, in people above the age of 40 years, non-methotrexate regimes are preferred globally. But there have been a lot of resource constraint settings where you cannot admit patient for each and every cycle. If you are giving high dose methotrexate, it has to be 12 grams per meter square. Okay. Now, such a high dose of methotrexate cannot be given in daycare. Usually, it is given by admission. You have to give a lot of hydration to the patient, and methotrexate level monitoring has to be done very strictly. If a methotrexate dose level that 12 gram cannot be achieved, then actually you will be doing injustice to the patient, because we have seen that the trials where they have used 8 grams, the results were inferior. Okay, so it is better not to give unmonitored 8 gram or less methotrexate as compared to a IAP regime. But if given properly, the toxicity profile is better tolerated in methotrexate, especially in the younger age group of patients. Okay, so this is what happens. In younger age group, ifosfamide can lead to permanent sterility, specifically almost unreversible 100% sterility in male. Okay, that's one more reason why methotrexate-based regimes are more preferred. Okay, but you must know that if you cannot maintain the dosages, if you cannot maintain the hydration, if you cannot take care of the complications, then you should not give methotrexate. That's why in many institutions in India, even though methotrexate levels are available, but like for example in TMS, we have everything available, we don't have bed, and we see about 270 osteosarcomas per year. I cannot admit 270 patients for 6 to 8 cycles of methotrexate and every cycle for 5 to 6 days indoor. It's just not possible for us. So we don't give methotrexate. Fine. Plus, ifosfamide has shown sort of equal results. They may not be equal, but there's no head-to-head comparison as such. But something is your treatment has to be according to your infrastructure, your patient needs, and what they can tolerate. So that's how it goes. Okay. So let me ask this question to whom I have not. There are two galaxies which have not written their name. So I think the first galaxy can answer why. So how will you stage a Ewing sarcoma patient? I don't know who's the first galaxy. Any one of you? Else I'm reviewing both of you. No galaxies? Oh, are these guys there or not? Anyways, Dr. Saujanya. Hello, am I audible?
You're audible, sir.
Dr. Saujanya. Dr. Salim.
Yes, sir.
Yeah,
Hello,
Salim,
sir.
tell me,
Yes.
how do you stage Ewing sarcoma patient?
Sir, we do the non-contrast CT chest and bone scan as like osteosarcoma. Along with that, we need to add the bone marrow biopsy, sir. We should do the bone marrow biopsy.
How many sites?
Yes. These are the 3 investigations that we need to do for staging Ewing sarcoma.
Can you do anything else also? If you want to avoid bone marrow biopsies?
Yes, sir. We can do the PET CT, sir. We can do the PET whole body PET CT scan from whole body PET CT scan. We can do, sir.
Very good. So that is one more point, that if you do whole body PET scan, you obviate the need of invasive bone marrow biopsies. So PET scan has a greater role in staging in Ewing sarcoma as compared to osteosarcoma. Okay, Salim, also tell me now quickly, what are the agents which are given in neoadjuvant chemotherapy in Ewing sarcoma? You know, you don't know?
No, sir, I forgot.
Okay. Dr. Arham Syed, can you please tell me agents used for Ewing sarcoma, like we discussed for osteosarcoma? What chemotherapeutic agents are given for Ewing sarcoma? He's not there, right? Okay, not there. We remove him. Dr. Bharat.
Sir.
Yeah.
Sir, we usually prefer VDC and alternating with the IE regimen. It is vincristine, dactinomycin, cyclophosphamide, alternate with the ifosfamide and etoposide.
Very good, very good. Okay. So, what are the age? So we've given neoadjuvant chemotherapy. So I expect everyone to read about. I'm just telling you standard question. What are the advantage of giving neoadjuvant chemotherapy? So you have it there in all the books. So just read about all that. Then you do. So essentially, in bone sarcomas, your local therapy is sandwiched between neoadjuvant and adjuvant chemotherapy. Okay. So the advantage of neoadjuvant chemotherapy, which agents to use. You must also know what are the side effects of each and every agent. So those also you should know. Then we come to local therapy, which is essentially surgery. And in Ewing sarcoma, it can be definitive radiotherapy as well. That is more preferred for the lesions which are in the axial skeleton, where we cannot resect them with R0 resections, or their resection will cause very high morbidity, and there we use the definitive radiotherapy. Okay, so this is about local therapy. Now, again, a lot of questions can be asked on what are the indications for doing amputations, why you cannot do limb salvage surgery. So, Dr. Rudra, can you please tell me what are the contraindications for doing limb salvage surgery?
Yeah, sure, sir. So, in case of an involvement of the neurovascular bundle by a malignant tumor, it is first,
Okay.
sir. Secondly, if the tumor is not responding to chemotherapy and still growing in size, so it is the
Okay.
second one, sir. Thirdly, if there is a huge pathological fracture with contamination of the surrounding tissue, so it again rules out the possibility of limb salvage, sir. And that's it. Sometimes limb salvage amputation would be a better option, sir, to reduce the size
Uncontrolled
chances of local
infections.
recurrence.
Uncontrolled infections.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So essentially, what you should say is that if the function of the reconstructed limb is inferior to an amputation and external prosthesis, amputation should be done. That is the bottom dictum line. And obviously, you should be able to achieve negative surgical margin. So all these indications which Dr. Rudra has spoke is about where there's a huge contamination, infection, or pathological fracture which is not united, or you have wrongly done biopsies which are through the main motor muscles which are responsible for the function of the limb, whether the major nerves are involved at a higher level. So these are the indications for doing amputation, and essentially that you should be able to achieve negative surgical margins, and function should be better than doing an amputation and a prosthesis. So this is the bottom. Okay, and they can ask you various modalities of reconstruction. So Dr. Rudra, if you have a osteosarcoma of distal femur, so what are the modalities of reconstruction you have? And just divide them into biological and non-biological, and where they are used. Can you just
Yes, sir. Sure, sir. So, reconstructing modality after osteoarticular resection of distal femur are divided basically into two parts. Sir. It can be a biological one or a non-biological one. Non-biological ones are usually not permanent. They require revision because they are amenable to wear and tear. It falls into two categories. It can be either reconstruction with a megaprosthesis, or it can be either reconstruction with a nail cement spacer. The biological option for reconstruction on distal femur can either be a rotation-plasty, sir, or it can be arthrodesis with a vascularized fibroid graft, or it can also be a reconstruction with a using some of the treatment procedures like ECRT and cryoablation, in which we can use the patient's native bone as a size-matched allograft for the patient, sir. Osteoarticular allografts are not shown to have a good outcome in osteoarticular resection, sir.
Okay, so basically, depending upon where is your resection, you can use various kind of modalities. Each modalities have their own advantages and disadvantages. If you are resecting a bone with arterial surface, the most commonly used are the megaprosthesis because they are easy to do. And nowadays, we have good quality megaprosthesis. You can have different sizes and shapes depending upon the patient bone size, and the reconstruction is pretty easy. These are usually cemented prostheses with which patient can walk immediately, maybe on the same day of the surgery. Cosmesis is good, so these are the advantages. If you have diaphyseal lesions, you would like to do more biological procedure because once they are incorporated, they are for lifelong, and here you can use allograft, you can use patient's own autograft, you can use a combination of autograft and allograft. You can use patient's own sterilized tumor bone, and this is what Dr. Rudra was telling you, that you can use radiotherapy to sterilize the tumor bone, or pasteurization, or liquid nitrogen, that is the cryotherapy. So these are the different modalities of reconstruction. At least you should know the names and few indications of it. Okay. So once you have excised the specimen, what do you do with the specimen? And let me ask this question to Dr. Onco, Dr. Onco. Onco has asked some 8 questions. Let me ask some questions.
Hello.
Yeah.
What are the questions, sir?
Question is, when you have excised the specimen, what do you do with that specimen?
We have to mark that specimen, sir, superior, inferior, and for short superior, long lateral. And,
Okay, done
send
that.
for
After that, do you want any information out of it?
Percentage of necrosis I want to know after neoadjuvant chemotherapy, sir. Whether it is more than 90% or less than 90%.
Okay. Apart from that, sorry?
That's it, sir. I know that.
Something more
I know
important
that
than necrosis. Hello? Hello? Something more important than necrosis.
I don't know, sir. Sorry, sir.
Margins.
Yes, sir. Margins. That would
You want to know margins or not?
Margins. Okay.
Whether
Yes,
you have
yes, sir.
excised the tumor
Of course, sir,
completely or
margins.
not. Yeah. So that is more important.
Yes, sir. Yes.
Yeah, because any positive margins, especially in osteosarcoma, it's a death sentence for the patient.
Yes.
So first thing which is more important is to assess your margins, whether you have been able to remove the tumor completely or not, and that's a very, very strong prognostic factor. Necrosis is a prognostic factor, but you can't do much about it. Because even if you change chemotherapy, some institutions do that, but it doesn't change anything. The prognosis remains the same, the outcome doesn't become better. Okay? So you want to assess the specimen, you want to know what is the necrosis, you want to know what is the margin status. So what are the grading systems for us assessing necrosis?
Hello. Yes, sir. So we use HUO system for grading of necrosis in bone malignancies, sir. It is divided into 4 grades, sir. Yes, sir. Grade first grade will be less than 90%, sir. Second would be 90 to 99%, sir. Third would be 99 to 100%, sir. And fourth is completely 100%, sir. Sorry, it's less than 50% the first grade, sir. 50 to 90% the second grade, 90 to 99 the third, and about 100% the fourth grade, sir. This is the HUO system, sir.
Okay, and what about Ewing's?
Ewing's, for Ewing, sir.
Yes, Ewing, how do you grade it?
I don't know, sir, answer for that.
Let Dr. Avinash Rajra tell us about Ewing's. Yeah, Avinash, tell me.
Sir, for Ewing we use PC's grading system.
How many grading systems they have?
Sir, I don't remember actually, sir. I think it includes 3 grades. Sir, I don't remember.
Yeah, so this is called as digging your own grave. So one more thing, when you are presenting a case, don't utter any word which you don't know, because most of the questions are asked from what you say. Okay? Yeah, anyone on PC grading?
There are 3 grades in PC grading, sir, for
Very
Ewing
good.
sarcoma. Grade 1 is evidence of macroscopic foci of viable tumor.
Very good.
Grade 2 has very isolated microscopic nodules, whereas grade 3 there are
Not
no
nodules. Microscopic, not nodules, islands.
Islands, yes.
Yeah, yeah.
Grade 3 no viable tumor islands.
Yeah, 100% necrosis. Good, great. Okay. So anyways, let's not go into detail of why pitchy came and other things, but yeah, so you have done that. and then you complete your adjunct therapies. Fine. So I think it's almost hour and a half. Though I would have loved to discuss more about relapses, but maybe I think we can take in one of the other class where we can discuss only relapses, I think. Okay. So you want to ask me anything? Yeah, one more thing. How do you follow these patients up? How long you want to follow? What investigations you want to do? And what should be the duration and the frequency of follow-up? Anyone? Deepak Sharma, Santosh Kumar.
Sir, sir, I'll tell, sir.
Yeah, good, please.
Yes, sir. Sir, we'll do every 3 monthly follow-up. We'll do a X-ray for local, and chest X-ray also we can do, sir. And CT chest will do monthly in first year, and then, sir, that's what. Every 6 monthly we'll do.
Which institute you work in?
Sir, I'm JR2 in Bangalore Medical College as a radiation oncologist.
Okay. So I'll just cut it short. You don't do CT scan every 3 months, ever.
Yes, sir.
Okay. You can follow these patients every 3 months for first 2 years, then 6 monthly up to 5 years, and then yearly thereafter. So that was the old protocol, which is still there in ESMO guidelines and which is still there in NCCN guidelines. CT scans you only do at 6 months, not at 3 months. Okay.
Yes.
But the randomized control trial done at Tata Memorial also says that you can follow these patients at every 6 months with chest X-rays also. And if you have any doubt, then you do further investigations. Just read a bit about it. But even if you say this one or the other one, both should be correct. But please read carefully what is the exact protocol. Don't say CT scan every 3 months. Okay?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, go ahead if you want to ask me any questions.
Sir, can you please say something about extracorporeal radiotherapy?
Okay. So, as I told you that when we talk about biological reconstruction specifically for the intercalary defect, where we can save the joints above and below, and we want to reconstruct these defects by using patient's own tumor sterilized bone. So what we essentially do is that we excise the tumor specimen and we remove this bone. Now, once this bone is removed, we want to reimplant it back, but we want to make sure that we do something to this bone, that the tumor cells in the bone are completely killed. Okay. Now, there are multiple procedures by which it can be done. So, the first one and the most famous is the extracorporeal radiotherapy. So, in extracorporeal radiotherapy, you strip off all the tissues, then you wrap the bone in vancomycin or any antibiotic soaked mop, and then you send it for radiation when the patient is on table at the same time. Then the graft goes to the radiation department where 50 grays are given in a single shot, and then the graft is brought back into the operation theater. It is cleaned again and packed with the cement, and then we put the graft back in the body, and we put plates or nails or whatever is required to fix it back. So this is extracorporeal radiotherapy. Now there are other means as well. Yeah, so he's showing you what is ECRT. You can see these pictures, how the grafts are taken, how we remove the soft tissues from it, and then how we use vancomycin soaked mops to put it, wrap it in plastic sheets, and then send it for radiation. So this is ECRT, how it is done. Okay. Now, if you don't want to use radiation, you can also use other modalities to sterilize this tumor bone. And the next commonly used is the cryotherapy. That is, you use liquid nitrogen. Liquid nitrogen can be brought inside the theater. you can use it. The initial part of the procedure can be just the same. You just take the bone, remove the soft tissues, and put it into the liquid nitrogen and put it back. Another very big advantage of liquid nitrogen is that you may be able to do pedicle cryotherapy also. That means you don't have to resect the bone completely from the body. One side can be still attached, and then you can. So this is like ECRT. Exactly how we do ECRT. This is exactly what we did for a small kid. We resected the bone completely, and there's a liquid nitrogen bin where we have put in liquid nitrogen and reimplanted it back. And as I told you, the another advantage is that we can do pedicle cryotherapy. So in some patients, we can do pedicle cryotherapy where you don't have to cut the bone from both the ends. You just cut it from one end, and then you can do the cryotherapy and then just reverse the bone back into the body and fix it with the help of plates. So this is the example of pedicle cryotherapy, which Dr. Rudra is showing you. The patient is still on the table, the bone is still intact with the host bone, and we just cryo the one part, and then it is still intact on the other side, and we just put it back and put it with the help of appropriate implant. Okay, then you can use pasteurization as well. And some people have used microablation, but those are not good modalities because they cause a lot of graft fractures and non-unions. So this was about ECRT and cryotherapy. Anything else?
Sir, I have a question, sir. Sir,
yeah.
Till how long can we keep? Should we keep the patient under follow-up? Is it lifelong or how many years, sir?
So ideally, the bone sarcoma patient should be followed for 10 years. And then these patients should be asked to see you SOS. The follow-up should be continued lifelong, but they don't have to come and see you. They can come and see you whenever they want to see you. Because we have seen that some of our Ewing patients have even relapsed at 18 years or 20 years post completion of treatment. But that doesn't mean that you have to call each and every patient on follow-up and very rigorously. So after 5 years, they come and see us once a year for up to 10 years. And then at 10 years, we release them and we tell them that they can contact us anytime if they have any issues, and they come. Another very important thing is that these patients must be monitored, especially after 3 to 4 years, for the toxicities of the chemotherapy or maybe radiation therapy. Because like we know that, adriamycin have a lot of cardiotoxicity, cisplatin have ototoxicity. So we have seen a lot of our patients who are on long-term follow-up, they come back with these issues. And we should not just look at the local recurrences or the distant recurrences. We should give them a holistic treatment, and we should also look for these late toxicities. A lot of patients come to us with infertility as well. So, those issues must be addressed on their follow-up, apart from whatever issues they are having with the implant breakage or the local site.
Thank you, sir. Sir, one more question, sir. In osteosarcoma and even Ewing sarcoma, all the cases should we do bone scan, or is it selected like all the cases of, especially for osteosarcoma?
I did not get your question. Your question is that if it is a osteosarcoma, should I do bone scan or not?
Yes, sir.
Yes, you must do.
Even for T1 or whatever the stage may be, we have to do a bone scan. That's what.
Absolutely. Any high-grade osteosarcoma, you must do. If you have a parosteal osteosarcoma, or if you have a low-grade intramedullary osteosarcoma, which are extremely rare, then you may not do. But any high-grade osteosarcoma, for each and every patient, you must do bone scan.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
Please feel free to ask your queries. More than happy to answer.
Sir, can you please say about the optimal sequencing of treatment in both osteosarcoma and Ewing's, like neoadjuvant chemo, then surgery, radiotherapy, like what should be the an adjuvant, like ideal sequencing of the treatments?
Ideal sequencing of the treatment, मैं समझा नहीं. I didn't understand your question completely. Ideal sequencing, मतलब as I told you that every patient local treatment should be sandwiched between neoadjuvant and adjuvant chemotherapy. Because what else you want to ask? I don't know.
Like sir, in osteosarcoma, like neoadjuvant always should be given first, or can we directly go ahead with surgery and then go ahead with chemotherapy, or like that?
Okay. So in an ideal scenario, you must give neoadjuvant chemotherapy because it has very distinct advantages. Most of the patients, it reduces the size of the disease, it decreases the vascularity, and the chances of achieving negative margins is much higher. You may be able to save some structures, and it's good to give neoadjuvant chemotherapy unless and until you have contraindications of giving neoadjuvant chemotherapy. That can be if patient has presented with infection, fungating wound, where you cannot give, then you can go ahead with resection first and then give adjuvant chemotherapy completely. But ideally, everywhere globally, neoadjuvant chemotherapy is the standard of care unless until it is contraindicated. There may be situations that you have given 2 cycles of chemotherapy, but the tumor is increasing in size. Then you may go ahead with surgery after 2 cycles of chemotherapy, and then complete the remaining chemotherapy. But it has to be completed. Some people give me an argument saying that in very small percentage of patients, neoadjuvant chemotherapy they may increase. So my counter argument is that if a biology of the disease is so aggressive that it increases on the neoadjuvant chemotherapy, then irrespective whatever you do, you're going to lose those patients. You anyways going to lose those patients who are increasing on the neoadjuvant chemotherapy. So why unnecessary sort of doing them morbid surgeries and putting them in problems? So all these patients must undergo complete removal of the disease, preferably surgically, and then whatever the remaining adjuvant chemotherapy is there, it should be completed. In osteosarcoma, there is no role of adjuvant radiotherapy. If you get margin positive, then you must counsel your patient for revision surgeries, which most probably in all the times, mostly it's only amputations. But if you want to be ideal and if you want to be legally correct, you must counsel them. Patient may or may not agree for that. That's a different story. But for Ewing sarcoma, yes, you have radiotherapy as backup, even if your margins are closed or if you have microscopic positive margins. But that doesn't mean that you do debulking of the Ewing patients. Debulking has no advantage over giving definitive radiotherapy. So you should only do surgeries where you can completely remove the tumor, and where there was a large soft tissue mass, pathological fractures, patients who have not responded nicely to chemotherapy, where intraoperatively you found that the margins are closed, you must add up radiotherapy in Ewing sarcoma and then again complete your adjuvant therapy. That's what sequencing, if I understood it correctly.
Thank you.
Sir,
Thank you so much.
Can I ask a question, sir?
Please.
Sir, in Ewing sarcoma, sir, do we have to routinely get bone marrow biopsies even in PET negative patients on initial workup?
No.
Okay, sir.
We have enough data now. We have enough data now, which has come globally, that FDG PET scan is sensitive enough to pick up marrow disease, and if your patients are PET negative, then you can obviate the need of doing bone marrow biopsies, and there is adequate data to support that.
Okay, sir. What's the current role of bone marrow biopsies then? In spite
If
of
you
being...
don't have a PET scan, please do bone marrow biopsy from 2 different sites.
Okay, sir. Okay. Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Thank you, guys. I enjoyed it. I hope you also learned something. And if you have any queries, you can contact Rudra, or you can email me, or you can speak to Navneet, and these guys will arrange some more classes. Okay.
Thank you so much, sir. It was very much interesting to learn from you. Thank you so much, sir.
Okay, have fun. Bye-bye.
Thank you, sir. Bye. Bye, sir.
Nice, Rudra. Good presentation.
Thank you, Rudra, sir, also.
Thank you, sir. Thanks a lot, sir.
Thank you.